Hello everyone, I'm Marcello La Rosa.
And I am Marlon Dumas.
Welcome to the first live event of the Fundamentals of BPM MOOC. Well, let's start with some quick stats about the cohort. We're very happy to see that there are more than 6,500 registrations, and the participants come from over 80 countries in the world. That's a clear signal that there's a universal appeal in BPM. We've also run this quick poll in the last week to get an understanding of your interest in BPM as well as your current role. And we saw that largely the audience is made by professionals, many of whom are already working in the area of BPM. That's roughly a quarter of people having a managerial role. So from entrepreneur to director to executive manager. Another quarter having a business role, like business analyst or business developer. Another quarter with an IT role, like ranging from a solution architect all the way to software developer. And finally, another quarter coming from tertiary education, so academics and students. In the poll, we also asked about your interest in BPM. And we saw that there is a great interest in process redesign, followed by process analysis and discovery. We're very happy to know that because this is pretty much the focus of this course. And in fact, the optional project will have tasks revolving around these three main topics, which we will deal with in weeks 2, 3, and 4. So week 2, we will cover discovery, week 3, process analysis, and week 4, process redesign. So, Marlon, would you like to talk a bit about the logistics of the course?
Yes, sure. So, as you have seen, the course consists of weekly content that is released at the beginning of each week. There are in total 6 weeks of content. We are currently in week 1. The content of this week was released on Monday, and it has 2 topics: introduction and process identification. As we move along, there will be more content being released every week. You can expect the content on every Monday at 00 UTC time. Every new piece of content will consist of videos with surrounding text and illustrations, interactive activities that you can complete at your own pace and that allow you to apply directly some of the concepts that are introduced in the videos, as well as a weekly quiz, which tries to recap the 2 topics covered during the week, consists of 10 questions, and that also you can answer at your own pace. These quizzes are really meant for self-assessment. They are not in any way any form of summative assessment. We are not trying to make people fail in this course, or in no way. You can even retry the questions in the quizzes as many times as you want, and if you give up and you say, like, I really want to know what the answer is, there is a show answer button that should give you enough hints so that you actually know what the answer is. So you are not left, with the question like, what was the right answer to this question? There is also a project that will effectively start this coming week. It consists of 3 tasks. 1 task is related to process discovery, which is the topic of next week, and the task will be released on Monday. There will be another task related to process analysis the following week, and a 3rd task related to process redesign, which will be in the 4th week. The project is completely optional. It's up to you to engage in it if you wish. If you don't wish, you can skip it. This course is completely modular, and it's really for you to take as much as you wish to take out of it, as much as is within your interest. In the course, we will be using 4 tools, essentially. This week, we had an introductory week, and we covered the topic of process identification architecture. We didn't use any tool. Next week, we will be covering the topic of process discovery, specifically discovering new processes by means of modeling. So we will be suggesting you to use a process modeling tool called Synavio. You can find the link in the resources page of the course website. If you follow the link from the course website, you will be able to create an account in Signavio with a 90 days trial version, which will be sufficient for the needs of this MOOC. The Signavio is a cloud-based solution, so it's you don't have any installation to do. You just create an account, enter it, and you can start creating BPMN models, as well as many other types of diagrams that we are not going to cover in this course. So please feel free to take advantage of this 90 days trial offer as much as you can. In the third week, we are going to be talking about analysis techniques, qualitative analysis techniques, but also quantitative analysis techniques. One of the main techniques we will introduce for quantitative analysis is process simulation, and we will be using a business process simulator called BIT that is in week 3, meaning in 2 weeks' time. It's also a cloud-based solution, and it doesn't even require to create an account. It's just like you can start using it straight away, and it allows you to simulate process models that you have created using Signavio. In week 4, redesign, we are not going to be using any additional tools, but then in week 5, when we get to automation, we will be using a business process management system called Visagi BPM Suite. This is, there's also all the links available on the resource page to it. We understand that the audience is very diverse, and some of you are technical and will be very interested by touching a business process management system, but some of you come from the management side all the way to executives, and this automation topic and playing around with Visagi might not be directly of interest. So we do not expect everyone to engage with Visagi BPM Suite. See that as an optional activity that you can undertake if it is in your interests. And we will be providing further information about how to use and access Visagi closer to week 5. In the final week, we are going to be talking about process monitoring, and we will emphasize one particular set of techniques and tools for process monitoring called process mining. And to practice your skills, you will be using a tool called Disco, which is also listed in the resources page. And if you follow the link from the resource page, you will be able to download also a trial version that will be sufficient for the purposes of this MOOC. And you will be able to undertake the activities and the quizzes of that week 6 with that tool. So that is what we have to say about the logistics of the course.
A couple of additions. The deadline for the quizzes is 7th of November, but the content of the course, meaning all videos, the text, and the activities, will still remain there until 7th of December. After 7th of December, this particular course will close. However, we are planning for a second delivery early next year, around the period of February. More information will be provided in due time. So I think that's all for logistics. Should we move to the discussion?
Let's move to the questions. And
so let's start with a quick summary of the discussions that we've had this week. It's very nice to see that even if we are just in week 1, there has already been quite a lot of lively discussions, mostly revolving around the activities, these inline activities in between the videos for week 1. For example, there was this one activity asking to rank the BPM values. And there has been many different answers. And clearly what we can summarize and the reflection that we can make out of all these answers is that there is no answer fits all. And while we did show some statistics resulting from a survey where we interviewed roughly 100 people, and you can see that efficiency is at the top, followed by compliance and then quality, there is no answer that fits all. That's what happens, that's what occurs in the majority of the organizations, at least those that have been interviewed. The answer is that it depends on the strategic goals of your own organizations. There will be organizations that will be more attentive to the customer experience, and hence they may want to privilege quality. There are others that run in cost-saving modes, and then they will have to privilege efficiency, or others, especially government agencies, that are very interested in compliance, because we know that they have to comply more than any other agency to all the norms and regulations that are out there. So the particular ranking of values for which we can use BPM, so the values that we can achieve out of a BPM program, really depend on the specificities of our organization. And indeed, some of you did provide this as the answer, saying, look, in my case, it's quality, in my case, it's compliance, but I understand that this is really specific to my organization. Then there was, yes, another activity about a fault resolution process. And unfortunately, one way or another, we have all been involved in our lives in one of these nasty fault resolution processes that did not lead to a positive outcome. There, the idea was to start thinking in terms of processes and understanding that everything that we do, especially in the context of an organization, but as in this case, in the context of a private process like the fault resolution, every activity that we perform is actually part of an end-to-end business process. So that is to start thinking with that particular mindset, the process thinking mindset, which eventually will bring us to think about solutions for improving the business process performance. Thinking not about the performance of that specific activity, but the performance of the whole end-to-end business process. And then there was another activity. So there was the one about the ranking, the one about the fault resolution process, and then there were questions about identification that we received.
We are going to move indeed to the questions. Let's take the first question, and I'll read it, and then you can go and answer it. So process identification, essentially, one of the participants, Jeff Frampton, is basically refers to the question of how do I capture, is there any methodology to capture how one process can impact another one? What kind of side effects can there be between different processes?
After redesign. So in fact, the video specifically that Jeff refers to is why do we perform process identification, which is in the second topic, identification of week 1. So in that video, we said that due to time, resource constraints, more in general due to budget constraints, we cannot manage, it is not advisable or it is not even possible to manage a large number of business processes at the same time. So we talk about the complexity of a BPM project, given specifically that by the complexity of the interrelationships that exist between these processes. So we start from an understanding that indeed there are different relations between business processes, and we provided some guidelines in the identification phase on how to pinpoint these relationships. We talked about horizontal relationships, meaning order relationships. For example, an order to cash process is preceded by a lead to quote process and is followed by a process that looks after sales services. We also talked about vertical relationships, for example, between a process, order to cash, and a sub-process for a meeting invoice. And we also talked about generalization, specialization relationships. For example, you have an order to cash process, but this can be specialized into off-the-shelf products and custom-made products. So in identification, we have to establish these relationships. Then yes, because of resource constraints, we will not possibly be able to manage all the interrelated processes in a given project. So we will have to do a selection. And besides performance, we will have to look at the strategic objectives of the organization and at the feasibility, as we discussed in the process selection part of identification. But when it comes to redesign, the question is, how do we measure the impact of the redesign activity that we did on a specific process? So how do we check that, in fact, this redesign activity hasn't caused any side effect, any negative effects on other processes? Well, there are two aspects to this question. One is, how do we do it? And the other is, how do we make sure that this is properly done? So first of all, in the monitoring phase, instead of just measuring the performance of the specific process that we have just redesigned to make sure that indeed the new process design is paying off, we should also measure, as far as it is economically viable, the performance of all the other processes that we have identified as being related to the one that we have redesigned. And how do we find out? We look at the process architecture, which is this artifact that we are creating in identification to also keep track of all these relationships between processes. The second part is an aspect related to governance. So it is applying due diligence, and this depends on the governance structure that surrounds the particular BPM project that we are running, to make sure indeed that this monitoring is done properly, that the right metrics are utilized, and that these interrelated processes, the performance of all these interrelated processes is checked. Other than that, to my knowledge, there is no stepwise method for measuring the impact of redesign on other processes.
Right. I'm going to take two questions now by Bruce Joycey. The first question refers to the fact that enterprises are currently in a very transformative mode, innovating, disrupting the market, delivering rapidly, are sought after, highly sought after in companies nowadays, have higher visibility in the management teams than do process management, for example. And the question is how to pitch BPM in the era of digital and rapidly changing markets. So that's an excellent question, very, very timely question indeed. I think the short answer is that we should, in this kind of environments, we should not be pitching business process management. We should be pitching more a subset of BPM that I would call business process innovation. And you will find a lot of literature on process innovation, including numerous case studies and some sketches of initial methods in that field that maybe will be very, very useful to consult. Process innovation is being used by many of these digital era companies, including Amazon, that has radically innovated in the area of shipment and delivery processes and also distribution processes. They started by using predictive analytics techniques to determine what items to store in their different distribution centers. And more recently went a little bit further into and introduced a concept of anticipatory shipping, which means that they try to predict when a truck goes out, what kind of products could be potentially ordered in that particular area where the truck is going to make a delivery by other customers, and they will preemptively put some stock of those products into the truck so that while the truck is driving, doing certain deliveries, if an order arrives for a certain product that was expected to be ordered, the truck is deviated to deliver that order, and then the order can be delivered within a couple of hours of the click. So that is an example of how you can use predictive analytics, which is an emerging technology, in order to innovate on a process that traditionally has been performing more or less the same way for probably 30 to 40 years. The same thing is happening in the airline industry. For example, many airlines, have gone into web checking, but Qantas, for example, has gone way beyond that and tried to systematically innovate the passenger-facing processes to the extent that they will introduce RFID chips into the loyalty cards, and the RFID chip can be turned into a boarding pass. The loyalty card, can be turned into a boarding pass and can also store the baggage tags. And that allows them to automate a lot of the processes of checking the passengers and delivering and returning bags and processing claims on the bags and so on. So that these are examples of companies that are basically pushing the boundaries of BPM into this field that I would call process innovation. Having a process innovation initiative or programming in an organization is a very excellent way of trying to consolidate different emerging opportunities that are created by new technologies or by new business models or by new expectations that customers have. So rather than having one initiative for every emerging opportunity, we can consolidate them in a process innovation program. So yesterday was RFID and cloud computing, and that created a lot of opportunities to innovate different processes. Today, we are talking a lot about data analytics and in particular predictive analytics and social media. And that allows to modify, to innovate on a range of processes. Tomorrow we might be talking about cognitive computing or automated decision management, and that might trigger a lot of new opportunities to innovate the different processes in the organization. And what we can try to sell to management is this concept of having a process innovation program through which all these different initiatives for keep the company in all sorts of directions and handling them with no structure. Second question.
Before you go there, then a quick pointer. So in week 4, during the redesign phase, we are actually going to discuss a specific method called process model canvas to foster process innovation, which starts with the wow effect that we want to generate in the customer, so through an innovative product or services, and then it works its way backwards in order to understand what we need to change in the process or what we need to engineer in the process in order to achieve that. And to summarize, essentially, the idea of this behind process innovation is to move from more of an inward-looking type of redesign, where we look inside the organization, towards a more outward-looking approach, whereby we look and explore, not only emerging technology, like it was RFID or cloud computing or cognitive computing, but we also look at emerging business models, emerging organizational strategies, like, for example, organizations that nowadays work through social media, like through social media marketing or through crowdsourcing, like Topcoder, etc. So it is this transition from more of a traditional inward-looking approach, specific to incremental process improvement approaches like Lean or Six Sigma, towards an outward-looking approach. And so this is actually one of the dimensions that we will use during week 4 to classify process redesign approaches. And there will be also the second part of the video interview to Michael Grossman that will in fact talk about this characteristic of BPM of being ambidextrous, meaning that on the one hand, it offers a set of approaches called transactional, because they allow us to move incrementally, step by step, to a more optimized solution, to a better business process. And the other is a set of approaches more transformational in nature, that lead to radical change, often being outward-looking, that will allow us to achieve innovation, or that will help us with that target.
A second question by Bruce Joyce says that it refers to this concept of case management, and says that from an IT perspective, there's a lot of processes, a lot of requirements in different processes that are better handled through this more flexible approach that we call case management than through traditional BPM products that are designed to automate production processes, meaning very repetitive and relatively standardized processes. And what he's seeing is that there are vendors, BPMS vendors, that are incorporating case management into their products, but these two things are still isolated. There is like the features for automated repetitive products and the part of the product that deals with case management. And the question is like, what are our thoughts in terms of how these two distinct disciplines that are currently distinct, business process management systems and case management systems, how do we see them as interacting or converging? I think it is what we observe, and it's not what we predict, but what we're observing is that there is indeed an increasing attempt at incorporating case management into existing products. Initially, in the initial way of adaptive case management system, we saw sort of vendors trying to pitch entirely new products for case management, and these are switching into the same vendors that offer BPMS, offer case management systems. I think this will, over time, unavoidably lead to a certain convergence of the case management and the business process management side, which is in a way very desirable, because the same process at some point in its lifetime can be very flexible. For example, when you consider, for example, if in the fintech industry, where you have all these credit management processes in the context of peer-to-peer lending, for example, these companies are in very disruptive, innovative markets. and they have processes that are continuously evolving because they have to continuously be adapting to new requirements as they are discovering the market, and they incorporate different types of loans, different types of products, different types of customers, different types of investors into their marketplaces. Over time, however, their process starts to solidify to a certain extent, and they start to standardize and consolidate. It will be highly undesirable to have to build an entire IT system for your peer-to-peer credit checking in peer-to-peer marketplaces with adaptive case management, and then to have to completely replace it with a BPMS down the road once these processes become more stable. In the ideal world, you would like that the same business process management system allows you to move from a process in a liquid state to a process in a solid state without having to change the platform. And we see this as being the vision that vendors of business process management systems are trying to pursue at the moment. So we will see, time will say, but the next 5 years at least appear to be going in the direction of vendors exploring the integration.
From William Duke, what are the key strategic considerations when selecting an IT platform to manage all BPM initiatives? So for example, how industry, company size, or other business excellence programs will influence the selection of your IT platform? Well, first of all, we have to say, and as you will see in this course, there is no IT solution that fits all. Depending on the type of activities that you will do in your BPM projects, essentially depending on what phases of the life cycle your BPM projects will embrace, you will use one or another tool. So there are tools that have been specifically designed to offer collaborative process modeling. An example is Sagnavio. Now, Sagnavio cannot be used for automation, so there are other tools that are dedicated more to a technical audience in order to build process automation solutions. So to turn your conceptual process model that you might have created with one of these collaborative process modeling tools into an executable, meaning machine-readable process, an executable process model, as we will discuss in week 5. There are other tools for monitoring and for process mining, etc. So unfortunately, it's not possible, at least nowadays, today, to be able to have one IT solution that caters for the needs of all the phases of the life cycle. However, there is one key aspect that we need to consider, which is that in the selection of the tool that we are going to use for a specific phase of the life cycle, we should not just much be driven by, I would say, the maturity of the vendor, but rather by the specific requirements that we have. In fact, I've seen in many projects big, large enterprise solutions being rolled out when then at the end only 20% of the features of these solutions were effectively used. So when we talk about the size of the company, well, the licensing costs have to be considered, but also the cost related to customizing that solution, because it doesn't actually fit fully our requirements. So that is actually another driver, another criterion that should be considered besides just the general licensing costs. Another is the industry-specific solution. So there are general purpose out-of-the-box BPM systems, but there are also solutions that also provide some features for some process automation functionality, which do not go by the name of BPM system. In effect, they are very specific to a given domain. I'm thinking, for example, of claims handling systems. They are specific to handling claims in the insurance domain, but they also have some process automation functionality. However, there, the number of features that are out of the box there for insurance purposes, meaning, for example, for handling claims, will lead to less customization efforts by the client. Do you have anything to add on this question?
No, I think this is
so always think about requirements analysis before embarking into the acquisition of a big software tool for BPM. Consider what you need now and what you may need in the future. Just to give you a final example, many of these BPMSs nowadays provide social network capabilities or the possibility of checking your process instances via mobile. Is this something that you really need or you may need in the future? This is the sort of reasoning that you have to do.
Okay. There are now some minor questions in the list, and then we'll be back to some major questions. So a couple of minor questions relate to the languages and the tools used. One question is BPMN within the scope of the course? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Next week will be basically 80% about introducing the BPMN notation, and you will have the opportunity of practicing your skills with Synavio. And we will keep using BPMN notation throughout the course, pretty much almost until the end. Are we using BonitaSoft, which is a business process management system, as a tool as well? We will refer to several tools during week 5, which is the week dedicated to process automation. We will discuss the general architectures of business process management system, which is quite common to all these different tools, and also how do you go from a process model in BPMN at the level of, at a high level of abstraction, a conceptual process model, as we will call it, down to an executable process model. And we will try to do it in a very platform agnostic way. However, to give some opportunity to you to play around with the tool, we decided to standardize on one particular tool for this course, and that was Visagi BPM Suite, which is what we are going to do in week 5, and that's the only tool that we are going to see in any level of details. But we encourage you to try the activities of week 5 with a different tool, in particular BonitaSoft, if you would like to practice in your skills in that area. Was another minor question as about if the course material is going to stay open and accessible after the course is finished. Unfortunately, the answer, well, there's a good news and bad news. The bad news is that on 7th of December, the material will become unavailable. The good news is that the course will actually be repeated, and you will be very welcome to register again, or to, in the case if you are an academic, to ask your students to register and take the course. The next offering is planned for February, and more information will very likely be given when this delivery finishes about when will the next one will take place. And obviously, if you register again, you will have access again to the material, and even if you do not follow again the entire course. There was another relatively minor question about robotic process automation. How can BPM be leveraged in the field of robotics? I have to admit that we are completely outside the field of robotics, so we really cannot answer that question. But that question made me think about the other side of the question, which is very, very interesting from the BPM perspective, which is how robotics can be used in the context of BPM. And maybe not necessarily hard robots, but soft robots. Robots, for example, that are able to that are currently operating in call centers. For example, when you make a call and the robot tries to route you through it, or bots, self-checking bots, as you will find, for example, in many shopping centers, but also in airports nowadays, to automate different types of processes. And this is a question that will become increasingly relevant in the next 5 years, given the trends in this field. And there, I guess it relates to the question on process innovation that we answered before. It is really worthwhile to invest some effort into looking into this particular topic of process innovation, to understand how different companies are systematically using a set of principles to discover opportunities for innovating their processes by incorporating emerging technologies, in particular robotics. So I think this is a question that is worth investing some time into, because the knowledge, the skills that you can acquire in this area are very relevant in BPM practice and will become increasingly relevant. There is another question that I'll read to you, and maybe you can answer it. Small companies have different objectives than bigger ones. The example that is given is they are targeting more efficiency, for example. What differences can we encounter depending on the goals and the company size?
I think this is related to governance aspects of BPM. What I've experienced is, for example, that the way, so the company size clearly has an influence on the scale and effectiveness of a BPM program. We can see that there is one category of organizations where BPM is directly funded by the C-level, for example, by the CFO or even by the CEO. In these cases, BPM is of high strategic importance. These organizations tend to be very effective, not necessarily related to a specific value. As we said, answering the question before, really the value depends on the strategic objectives, so the strategic priorities of the organization. It could be quality, it could be efficiency, it could be compliance. But in this organization, BPM is short and sharp. So they invest a lot for short duration projects that have to deliver. And often they developed, so if we observe the maturity of this organization from a BPM point of view, we can see that the BPM program is clearly strategically aligned, and there is a governance structure in place to make sure that things are done properly with the right identifications of roles and responsibility, because the program has to deliver. But on the other hand, what we can see is that the expertise in the BPM methods and tool is not very high, is not very mature. And this is because the program has to deliver quickly, and so this type of organizations rely on external expertise, like consultants. Another profile, if we wish, of BPM is where BPM is directly funded by IT. So BPM is within an IT division, for example, funded by an IT director. In that case, there is a strong focus on methods and technological solutions. So in this case, what we have experienced is that BPM can deliver well as far as process automation solutions are, for example, concerned. However, it's often in this case is hard to sell BPM outside the IT sphere. So essentially, we're talking about automation. So the main values driving BPM would be those related to efficiency, improving, for example, the cycle time of the process, reducing resource utilization. And then there is a third category, which is related to BPM in the public agencies, where there is a strong attention to the voice of the customers as well as the voice of the employees. So there is a lot of maturity in the people and cultural aspects of BPM, but less in the knowledge of methods. And to here, for example, the value could be compliance.
Right. So I take another question by Max Day, very simple one, but a very difficult answer. What is the role of IT strategy or roadmap in enabling BPM?
You want me to talk?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that was easy for
I
me.
take the easy questions.
And then I have to answer. Well, what I can think of is clearly we cannot, so this is also to follow up on the previous question about what determines the choice of the IT platform for BPM. Clearly, we cannot decide on the acquisition of a particular tool, IT tool, outside of an IT strategy. This has to be incorporated in the IT strategy. So it has to make sense to acquire a particular software tool, especially if I think of process automation. The tool has to be able to integrate, so to interface with the other systems that are in place. For example, there might be legacy systems that the BPM system needs to integrate with. Another aspect related to the IT strategy is that of IT governance. For example, IT governance can be used to influence the way the IT tools for BPM are going to be used. For example, if I think about process mining, it is the role of IT governance to make sure that the right information is logged so that we can then derive meaningful insights out of the logs produced by the IT system of our organization, meaningful insights from a process point of view.
This question is really particularly relevant in larger organizations where, I mean, if we do not have an IT strategy or roadmap in place that will drive the decisions that are made in different BPM projects, then you're not going to, on the end, you're going to have systems that are very complex where things have been stacked one on top of the other in order to support different processes, and the BPM initiative is going to become slower and slower because process change is going to become more difficult to achieve if we don't have in place a proper IT governance and roadmap. I will take an easy question, right? So a BPM and event-driven process chains. So in event-driven process chains is a notation for process modeling that was used to be very popular in the late 90s and the 2000s. Nowadays, we can say safely has been superseded by the business process model and notation. In this course, because of the length of the course, which is relatively short, we have made a deliberate choice to focus on one notation. So therefore, we will only be covering BPMN and we will not be covering EPC. But once you have learned how to do things with one, it is not very difficult to move to the other.
You want to take this one as well, and then
I can.
Next.
Process naming. Some of the processes are named in the following way: verb to noun, for example, order to cash, quote to order, etc. What does it imply? Is the standard? There's no standard like de jure standard, but there is a very common practice in BPM that you will name a process by referring to the start of the process, the event that starts it, and the event that finishes, or the object that starts it and the order of the object that finishes it. So order to cash is definitely the most well-known process out there. Pretty much every company has an order to cash process, and it is named after the object that starts it, which is the order, and the object that ends it, which is the payment or the cash. And that process can then be decomposed. I can take an order to cash process and expand it. For example, I can talk about the lead to cash process, the process from the point we have a customer lead to the point we receive the cash. And we can talk from lead to quote, we can talk from quote to order, and we can talk about the process very conveniently in this way. Now, when we are doing process modeling, that we kind of are beyond process identification and we start doing more detailed process modeling. We take a process, we decompose it into sub-processes, as we will see next week. We would rather be using a different, perhaps more formal convention for naming sub-processes, which will be basically based on noun plus nominalized verb, for example. Yeah.
There's another question about the relationship between TOGAF and business process management. TOGAF, as we know, is an industry standard for enterprise architectures. So we have seen that the main deliverable of process identification is a process architecture, where the process architecture is a specific component of the overall enterprise architecture. Specifically, looking at the TOGAF model, it fits into the business architecture circle, as opposed to other architecture, like the architecture of the IT infrastructure or a data architecture. So this is the relationship. And clearly, we can use BPM in order to identify business processes and come up with this process architecture that then will be used as a component of the overall enterprise architecture. Related to this is the important aspect is the fact that these artifacts are not static, but they are living artifacts. So a process architecture and in general the overall enterprise architecture will evolve over time. So it's just a process identification, as far as BPM is concerned, is not an ad hoc, a one-off activity. We have to go back into that and keep updating the process architecture as the organization and its processes change. I think it's about time to wrap up.
It is about time to wrap up. There is a very lively discussion, and we are seeing that more questions are starting to emerge. We do promise you that we are going to be looking into the questions you have put there, and we are going to, the questions that we have not answered, we'll be putting some comments on them and giving you our feedback. but let's say in order to stay within the promised time, and for those of you who are in Australia and are about to go to sleep, then we might be closing.
By the way, if you're wondering where we are in Marlon's office at the University of Tartu. I'm currently visiting Marlon for a couple of months, so we'll be in the same time zone. But as you've seen, if you read from my little bio in the course, I'm a professor at the Queensland University of Technology in Australia. I belong to the BPM discipline, which is a discipline that is specifically focused in doing teaching and research around BPM, whereas Marlon is an adjunct professor at the Queensland University of Technology, but mainly works here at the University of Tartu.
Yes, that's absolutely, and we are very well positioned from our side to be listening at your questions both in the Australian time zone and in the US time zone, and trying to consolidate all these different points of views and trying to offering you some summaries of the discussions that are happening in the forum every so often. So stay tuned in the forum, and especially stay tuned for the announcement of the next weekly content next Monday.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us in the first live event. There will be a second live event down the track. Okay, hope you enjoy the rest of the course.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.